Live chat show. My name is Jack McLean. I'm your host, and tonight my guest is Lehane. Shane is currently the athletic performance coach at the Sydney Swans Football Club. Prior to working for the Sydney Swans, he has worked as strength and conditioning coach at Leicester Tigers, Melbourne Rebels, and Rugby Australia, the Wallabies. With over a decade of experience in elite sport, he's also embarking in his PhD on decision-making to make sound interventions. Before we start this episode, our mission here at Prepare Like a Pro is to empower aspiring athletes and staff with practical knowledge from some of the industry's most inspiring individuals and to strengthen the AFL community. If you like the show, please show support by following us on Instagram and subscribing to the podcast. We're on iTunes, Spotify, and YouTube. Welcome, Shane. Thanks for jumping on, mate.
Thanks, Jack. Thanks for inviting me on. I've listened to a few of your guests, and it's definitely an insightful podcast, so I appreciate you having me on.
Who would have thought a few years ago you'd have a picture of an oval? You'd be calling it a pitch. Are you calling it a pitch now or a field? Have you converted?
Yeah, I'm converting slowly. Probably the default is still pitch, but the footy language is starting to creep in a little bit more.
Yeah. I'm sure we'll go into it a bit more detail about the different sport demands and all the technicalities. But looking forward to diving in. Let's start the beginning of your career, mate. At what age did you discover you had a passion for strength and conditioning and more specifically working with elite athletes?
Oh, well, I guess probably the one thing that everyone in my position has is that we're probably all failed athletes to a certain extent. I was a pretty average sportsman, or average to okay sportsman who was always kind of, struggling to make first teams, and probably that developed an interest in developing physical capabilities. And I was coaching from a pretty young age. Munster Rugby, which is my local professional team, ran summer camps. I would work on those summer camps as like a 16, 17-year-old. Started coaching, technical rugby with kids at quite a young age. And I guess that some of those skills that I developed, I didn't realize at the time, but some of those skills that I was developing them have carried through the whole way. But when I finished school, I actually didn't really know what I wanted to do. I'd say the sports science community was relatively small in Ireland at the time. So I actually went to university and studied a history degree, and was playing sport myself at the time, started doing a little bit of strength conditioning work with the university teams there, and discovered that was a passion and something that I wanted to do. So I had a year left on my history degree. Luckily enough, university's free in Ireland, so I didn't run myself into too much debt, and then went over to UK to Loughborough University, which is a big sports science uni over there. And by the time I got there, I was pretty clear on what I wanted to do and where I wanted to go. So I was coupling coaching regularly, amateur teams, and then getting some exposure with professional environments. And I guess I was pretty clear at the end of that process that I wanted to work in the professional sports environment, if that was a possibility. So I had a number of internships there with professional teams, primarily in rugby union, and then working in amateur sport across the university and in Ireland with some hurling and Gaelic football teams, amateur rugby teams. Led to an internship with Leicester Tigers, which fortunately led to a full-time position at the end of that year. And here we are 13 years later, and I'm fortunate enough that that's my occupation.
Yeah, fantastic, mate. You mentioned a couple of things that'd be good to dive into there. That the fact that sports science wasn't the most popular career choice at the time. So through doing some strength and conditioning at universities and other teams around the community, you got a bit of a taste for it. What do you reckon at that point in your career? Why did you choose that side compared to maybe the technical side of coaching?
Yeah, I guess I probably didn't. I didn't consider sports science or strength and conditioning as a viable profession, to be honest. When I finished school and when I was starting university, I didn't know that much about it. And I guess I was always quite aware that my tactical knowledge around rugby union, which was my primary sport, it probably wasn't the level of depth or understanding there that would have been required to excel in that field. And I guess just the nature of my own experiences being an okay athlete, an average to okay athlete, that the interest in physical development was fostered at quite an early age with me, and that became an area which I guess was a more natural progressions in terms of my educational pursuits.
And you mentioned the internships, and you had a successful process where you actually landed a full-time job after the internship. For those S&Cs listening in, Obviously, that's not always the case, but what do you think, looking back now, what were some things that put you in good stead for the club to invest in you for your first full-time contract?
Yeah, I guess I was quite lucky when I took that opportunity at Leicester Tigers. I was very clear that that's what I wanted to do, and I actually think that's part of the internship process. If you actually do a period of time and you realize maybe this isn't the profession for me, or I'm more interested in another aspect of performance, be it analytics or video analysis or whatever it is, that's part of the process too. But I was very clear about what I wanted to do, and I think I'd accumulated quite a bit of experience in the amateur setting, and so I had practiced my coaching a fair bit, and then I had enough exposure in professional environments not to add technical knowledge in an elite environment, but probably more to understand how to behave and interact in that environment. Mm-hmm. So I was quite aware that I probably wasn't going to walk in. For those who might not be aware, Leicester Tigers is the most successful team in UK rugby. They're 11-time premiership champions and twice European Cup winners. So it's a very established program. I was pretty conscious that I probably wasn't going to walk in there and be solving performance problems for the department there. But what I could do was provide physical work and do what was required to help the program run smoothly.
Yeah. So that makes a lot of sense. That be clear on where you want to go, and then how you can contribute through assisting others in the environment.
And then you're obviously absorbing technical knowledge as you spend time there. I remember sitting in the office, and it's quite an established department now. We've got colleagues that have gone from there into private industry. Some have gone to the NHL. One colleague went to the NBA. One into private industry and the technology side. I remember sitting early days in the office and not only not understanding some of the concepts, but not understanding some of the words. I remember having to sit there and Google behind my desk, pretending that I understood what was going on. But what I was able to do was contribute effort at the start, and then as your technical skills improve and develop, then you're able to contribute more to the technical aspects of supporting a performance department.
Yeah, and you mentioned something I think pretty important point as well, is being able to understand the environment. It is a different beast working in elite sport and how it all flows. So those other internships that you did, for those to get a better understanding on how much time you put in to get to that point that led to success of full contract, what would be like a typical week while you were doing your internships?
Yeah, the dynamic of internships has changed significantly, I guess, since when I did it. Like that internship at Leicester Tigers was pretty much 12 months full time, which was kind of for no pay, minimal pay.
Wow.
I think the dynamic of that has obviously changed in recent years, which is probably for the better.
Was that through the club or through university?
That was through the club, but they did because I sought that internship out myself independently. But Bath Uni at the time did a placement opportunities there, and then I was coming from Loughborough, which is another established sports science uni, and had some experience, so I kind of was knocking on doors looking for internship opportunities at the time. And I definitely think that shift from that full-time internship model, I think that's pretty much dead now. But there's no doubt that accumulating time in the saddle and accumulating experience is what helps you. So I would probably encourage anyone who's starting out there that it doesn't necessarily have to be in a professional elite environment, but certainly logging time, making mistakes, learning from mistakes is necessary to be able to contribute to a performance department at the highest level. Yeah,
and you mentioned they're a strong, proud club. Was that deliberate that you went there? You wanted to go to the top?
It was obviously desirable to end up at a club like that, but to be honest, I was emailing and pestering anyone who would give me an opportunity, to be honest. I said I'd accumulated plenty of time, a kind of semi-professional amateur exposures too, and I was just lucky to end up at a club like that, really. But I guess a combination of persistence, experience, ambition, but no doubt a bit of luck as well. I applied to every other possible professional sports organization that I possibly could for time, and I was just lucky that they took me on.
Yeah. And you were there for a number of years. For the developing athletes that are listening in, you mentioned the performance side, success. Were there premierships involved with your stint at Leicester Tigers?
Yeah, there was. My first 3 years in professional sport actually were grand finals, which I took for granted at the time. I haven't been back to one in over 10 years now since that last one. And yeah, I guess ironically, the first 2 years we won the league as minor premiers and lost the final, and the last one I think we finished second, and I managed to get over the line in the final. And I guess like I keep saying it to the guys here at the Swans, it's easy to think that sporting career will just keep going, but in the time that I've been working in professional sport, people have, it's a difficult thing to get a professional contract. It's a difficult thing to remain a professional sportsman and stay injury free and stay listed. And then it's even rarer. The majority of people go through their careers without having, the opportunity to play in a grand final or win a medal. So when those opportunities present themselves at any level, you got to be grabbing them.
And thinking back at that time, like 3 in a row is an incredible feat, because obviously then you're the one that's hunted after the first one. Like what was something that really stands out when you think back in terms of things like leadership, the players, coaching staff, high performance?
Yeah, I think there was definitely a high performance mentality in that club, and it's quite interesting actually, because obviously there's a lot of focus on values, creating values. And I'm sure like most of us have walked into organizations where there's some inspiring words up on the wall to indicate the organization and the club's values. But what I really found is a place like Leicester Tigers didn't have that. It was more the consistent day-to-day behaviors of people that were there. And that was very much driven by Richard Cockerill, who for those outside of rugby might not be aware, but is a pretty notorious, uncompromising head coach. But the consistency around behaviors was paramount. It just wasn't acceptable. It wasn't accepted by the organization, and it wasn't accepted by the senior playing group to turn up there and not to be putting in effort every day. And I've spent time, my experience at Melbourne is probably, that's a young organization, trying to find its feet in professional sports landscape. And I think an organization like that is probably, trying to instill and learn those sort of values. They take time to develop. But I'd say consistency of professional habits, regardless of wins, losses, regardless of individuals' contract status, regardless of personal issues. And obviously there's going to be fluctuations there. Athletes are human beings at the end of the day, but the consistency of behavior was very high there.
Yeah, right. Okay, so wouldn't fluctuate depending on a win or a loss. There wasn't reactive. It was just consistently putting in the work each day.
Yeah, there was definitely emotional. I would say there was more emotion around the loss than there was emotion around the win, unless it was a grand final. It wasn't acceptable to be losing. But yeah, consistency of behaviors. And when I think back from athletic performance perspective of that side of it, the athletic performance realm has developed a lot in the last 12 to 13 years. It was literally a case of turning up and doing the basics very well over and over and over and over again over the course of days, weeks, months, years even.
And was there a lot of stability through the club at that time with staff and key players?
Yeah, we were quite fortunate. I think our department had a lot of stability, and then there was a lot of stability on the coaching end too. And it's actually, I was there for kind of the tail end of a very dominant period, and it kind of slipped. And it's interesting actually, in the time they've come back to the top now, but in that kind of intervening time that I've been away, they went through a period of they've just won the premiership this year, but they finished bottom of the league last year. So it's a bit of a complete 180. But when that stability, they now seem to have that stability again, which is again correlating with the team being successful. Yeah.
And then going back to your career journey, you then, by the looks of it, you went to make the move to Australia in Melbourne. And what was your decision making there? To obviously it was a successful club, and your place where you have a first contract. I imagine it would have been a difficult move in a lead role as well. What was your sort of thought process in moving countries?
Yeah, I guess the opportunity came up quite quickly. Bryce Kavanagh, who's head of performance at England Soccer now, was at the Rebels at the time, and we had a bit of a relationship. He was at one of the teams in Ireland, and we'd compete against each other. And when I'd go home, I'd pop in and spend some time there. And we had a bit of a relationship. So I got a call one day, and he was asking me about joining in potentially 12 months' time, and I was a bit non-committal, said I'll probably sign on at Leicester and we'll discuss it. And then a couple of days later, I got another call asking if I could be there in 3 weeks. So it was a pretty quick decision. It was a pretty quick decision in the end, really. But I'd grown up watching Super Rugby, and I guess the Australian sports landscape is obviously renowned globally, particularly around the sports science and athletic performance components. So that was really attractive, and then the opportunity to challenge myself in another environment. So it ends up being a pretty quick decision, but a pretty easy decision. And I'm not sure if I thought this or realized this at the time, but I couldn't have learned more than that transition, going from a successful team to a very established, successful team, stable team, to an organization that is still building and still finding its feet. And I learned some important lessons from that transition. Probably made more mistakes and had to learn more in that first 12 months than at any other point in my career.
Well, yeah, what were some of those mistakes that you made? Because obviously that is a fair change, going from a successful club to one that's developing. Well, yeah, fairly different environment, I imagine.
Yeah, different environment, and I guess this is what's kind of spurred my interest in this PhD question, which I'm trying to answer or provide a framework for. I turned up at the Melbourne Rebels after coming from a successful organization, and came there and probably didn't appreciate some of the differences between the competition structure, the depth and the quality of player in the squad, the stylistic demands of the team, and where athletic performance development sat in the performance hierarchy in terms of supporting the team winning and losing games. So I came from a team that played a very attritional brand of rugby, like where strength, power, hypertrophy was a really integral part of how the team were trying to play. I also came from an organization or team that that had a lot of quality players within their squad. And so the guy who was on the bench was also an international standard player. And because we were trying to play that kind of confrontational style, then I would say something like strength and power development sat quite high in the pecking order in terms of supporting outcomes on the weekend. And when I came to Melbourne, I inputted pretty much stuck that program into the Rebels environment. And there's consequences to driving up any physical metric, and that's okay if that's a decision taken from a collective organization. I think I took the view that I had the answers because I come from a successful organization, and what you realize when you come in there is the competition is shorter. It's pretty much a sprint. You play 28 to 32 games in a European season. You're playing 14 in a Southern Hemisphere competition. If you lose 3 games in a European competition around Christmas time, it's not good, but you can bounce back. If you lose 3 games in a Super Rugby season in a row, then your season could be done.
Yeah.
Second thing is the depth of squad. Like, we always had an international standard player who could come in if there was an injury. But if you're trying to attack, say, lower body strength, and your starting fullback gets a tight back, the next guy, he might be an international player, and the next guy might be a school kid. So the drop,
noticeable drop off. Yeah,
there's a noticeable drop off, which has much greater impact on performance than increasing that athlete's strength numbers.
And then probably games, so every game's
every game counts more. And then probably lastly is the stylistic demands. I think when I came to Super Rugby is known for being, and the Rebels especially at the time were trying to play a really fast tempo, move the ball around kind of style. So they probably had more of an emphasis, or we ended up having more of an emphasis as I understood the competition on maybe guys being a little bit lighter, speed development being a little bit higher in the pecking order, plyometric ability being a little bit higher in the pecking order, and strength still important, but just not that same need to develop athletes in the same way. So as I kind of learned those lessons through that transition from coming from one organization to the other and a different competition structure to the other. And when I think about moving now into a completely different sport, then the lessons from that transition have really, I think, have set me up better to make a transition like I have into the Sydney Swans.
Yeah. Thanks for sharing, mate. That's insightful into also your thought process of taking on a beast of a PhD research. We're talking about that off air, but that makes a little bit more sense now. In on that topic of, we talk about strength and conditioning philosophies, and you like you've mentioned, working in Europe, then to coming over to Australia, Super Rugby, and then now Australian rules football. Are there like non-negotiables with your strength and conditioning philosophy when you're the lead strength and power coach, or are you more now with your experience, like you mentioned earlier, making some mistakes, how each environment has its own different demands, therefore you have to be pretty flexible.
I think it's more. I think it's far more the latter. I actually think the kind of term of the philosophy fallacy. I actually think technical philosophies in terms of how we train athletes are like our job is to select appropriate tools and understand the environment and not really have a hard and fast philosophy. So my only real philosophy is that the football programs comes first, and that dictates or starts to direct your training interventions where they fit. How hard to push it, football first. And so I'll gone beyond being a Olympic lifting guy or a Westside barbell guy or a have to do RDLs guy. It's really a case of like, how are the team trying to play, what does the individual athlete need, and then how can we construct an appropriate intervention to support that. I guess my message has been since I arrived here is that there isn't, if we take the example of the strength and power program, there isn't a strength and power program. There's only the football program, of which there's a physical arm, where everything we're trying to do is come back to aspects of either directly supporting footy or increasing your availability, or trying to increase your availability so you have more opportunity to train and get better at technical tactical outputs. Yeah, that would be my answer there. I think the only philosophy is to really start with the football program and support the football program.
Yeah, and then which makes a lot of sense with roles these days. Have you found that you'll have measures, key performance measures that can challenge that? So let's say you've got to put this much on the group with their box squat or anything like that, or is it moving more towards, which would obviously influence your subconscious motivation to try and get them strong, opposed to if you're trying to help the team win a premiership and you haven't got those KPIs?
So we've done a lot of profiling of the athletes over the last year. I think like if I'm honest and I reflect of where we're at with the strength and power interventions as an example this year, I think the programming has been relatively generic. Some individualization, but relatively generic, and we'll look to differentiate now that we've collected all this data over the course of the year. We'll look to differentiate into force dominant, velocity dominant, maybe even guys that we just need to maintain, and we're prioritizing technical tactical development. That'll be the step forward. But we'll produce physical reports for the coaches here and for the GM of football, and I've had some discussions around having KPIs around physical markers, but I actually think that's a bit of a dangerous route to go down. And I've had this conversation with some of the hierarchy here, because the goal ultimately for people in our role, the goal is actually not getting guys fitter or faster or stronger. The goal is winning more football games. That's what we're trying to do, or influence, have a positive contribution to the football program. And what you don't want is staff members working in silos looking to justify their own positions by maximizing physical outputs. And that's not to say there might be periods of time, I had one season in particular where we were coming off the back of a pretty poor season, and I would say had pretty deconditioned athletes. And at that time, really driving up physical capacities, I think had a really positive impact on the team performing.
Yeah.
But that's not always the case. I think it's key to understand. I think the key skill of being a practitioner in the team sport environment is it's not solely increasing physical capabilities, it's understanding where those interventions fit in the greater purpose of trying to win football games and perform well on a Friday, Saturday, or Sunday. Yeah,
because at the end of the day, they're not Olympic weightlifters or powerlifters. Yeah.
No.
Yeah. No, makes a lot of sense, mate. And thanks for giving us a good insight into whether philosophy is the right word, but I guess your thought processes in your programming. With influences of your career, when you look back, who have been some strong influences, mentors, if you like, that have helped shape your approach?
Yeah, I've been quite fortunate, really, by accident. I think I've crossed paths with a lot of experts and kind of almost founding fathers of kind of sports science in the professional team sport environment. When I think of really early influences, probably I played a bit of tennis when I was young. I grew up near a tennis club, and my first ever coach there, one of my first ever coaches, a guy called Liam O'Brien, is, even reflecting now, is one of the best coaches I've come across in terms of improving technical ability, but also having, driving motivation. When I reflect back, I think, being around someone like that at a young age had a pretty impactful resonated with me on the importance of coaching and the influence that a coach can have. But then professionally, one of the first people I ever came across in the Irish sports science landscape, which maybe not everyone's familiar over with here, is Dr. Lehane. And he really set up a lot of the professional systems around team sports in Ireland. Some of the stuff that's quite advanced now, and this was going on in the mid 90s. But athlete management systems, centralizing player contracts so you could manage player workloads, stuff that really was ahead of his time. And Des Ryan was part of that group as well, who's headed up the academy at Arsenal for years and is an expert in youth development. And then Alex Martin was my first kind of true high performance manager at Leicester Tigers, who is a little bit under the grid, but is maybe one of the best guys I've come across for really understanding the nuances of physical development, like really narrowing down on the physiology of developing athletes. And then the time I've been over here, again, like Bryce Kavanagh has gone from, has worked in professional cricket, has worked in netball, has worked in Aussie rules football, professional rugby, and he's now heading up the program at England Soccer. And I learned a lot from Bryce. Bryce's first role in professional soccer football was England football. It's one of the top jobs in the world, and he's shown that by having a diverse range of experiences and understanding performance more holistically, that he can have an impact, can walk into a sport that he hasn't been involved with before, and really have an impact. And I guess more recently, then the last couple of years, Dean Benton, John Pryor, the guys involved at Rugby Australia are, again, expert practitioners and really think about performance more holistically than just physical development. They're always, I know Dean's kind of really hammered home, and John Pryor have hammered home with me that, actually developing general physical qualities is relatively easy, but it's how you transfer those qualities to football performance is the nuance and the skill. So I've learned a lot from those guys, and then I'm fortunate to be part of a young, ambitious department here at the Swans. The Swans is a very stable organization that has had, it's been a pretty stable performance team here for a long time, led by Rob Spurs, Mike Rennie, Mark Kilgannon. Did a great job here for years and years, and have left a solid legacy of run a good program here, a good legacy of research and development. And then we've a relatively new department here for the first time in a long time in the last 2 years, and we're myself, Rob Innes, Will Sheehan, Dan Casenza, working with a great medical team. I guess we're all influencing each other and trying to build something here and build on the legacy of the guys that went before us.
And how many of those influence, like you mentioned, from all different walks of life, from a tennis coach to working with colleagues at Rugby Australia, how many of them came organically, and how many would you reach out to like you did with Leicester Tigers?
Yeah, I guess I always think with this isn't just true for professional development, but also personal development. I think it's a mix of formal and informal education there. So, there's I'm just doing the ASCA level 3 at the minute, and that's really good formal education. But then you're also connecting with people who are working in the NBA and MLS. You're having those informal conversations about some of the day-to-day problems. Some of those relationships have arisen through working in the elite sport environment. But I think I've always been quite good at reaching out and trying to connect with people, and a lot of us are trying to solve the same problems. If you can share your experiences, if you're willing to give something and not just take information, then I think those relationships tend to nurture and develop quite well. And then on the academic side, I've been really lucky, particularly around Warren Young, who's influenced me a bit and encouraged me to do this PhD, and Scott Tapley at Fed Uni, he's there at Warren, and then Lockie James and Paul Gaston at La Trobe, who are part of my supervisor team, and they really drive they're really interested in what's going on in the employed environment, but they also forced me to really be vigorous and around studying and keeping on top of the academic literature as well.
Yeah. And then going back to your career journey again, so you're at Melbourne Rebels for a good stint there, and then decided to move to Sydney Swans, I believe was your next role. Take us through your thought process in changing codes to Australian rules football.
Yeah, I guess I learned a lot from that transition. As I mentioned, I didn't realise when I made that move from Leicester to Melbourne, it's that Dunning-Kruger effect. I think I thought I knew everything when I moved to Melbourne. I thought I had all the answers coming from a successful team. And I learned so much in that transition. When you're, battling at the middle to the bottom end of the table at times, there's a lot more learning in those environments. And the role was very broad. It's part of a smaller team, smaller organization. So you really had an appreciation of what the head coach was trying to achieve, what the attack coach was trying to achieve, even what the commercial team were trying to achieve. And you understand that, winning games is only part of it. In a sport like rugby union in Melbourne, you're trying to, create a commercial footprint in there as well. So it gives you better appreciation. So I guess I learned a lot from that transition, and same when I was involved with the Wallabies at international rugby. And I guess I was aware that another big test of that would be moving to a code that I was relatively unfamiliar with. Living in Melbourne, it's hard not to get somewhere engrossed in footy, but I guess I've never been involved in the day-to-day running of it. So through that kind of sharing of ideas, and myself and Rob Innes was at Richmond Tigers at the time, we would frequently converse on if we had a hamstring issue, then maybe I'd seek his opinion, grab a coffee with him and have a chat through it. And I'd go over and present in our strength and power program. He'd come over to the Rebels and present on some of the rehab philosophies at Richmond. And through that information sharing, when he came up here, then we had a conversation about maybe potentially coming up. There was still a pretty thorough interview process following that. But the thought of working in another sport, the thought of working in a pretty prestigious organization like the Swans, and then also working with Rob, who I knew was a good guy, and starting to kind of really put our impact on, or put our imprint on an organization like the Swans, is a pretty exciting opportunity.
Yeah, absolutely. And what were some of the I guess big challenges early days as you were taking on the role?
Yeah, there were some big challenges, but again, from that transition, I was much more ready and prepared for those challenges. So one, Rob and I and Will, we didn't walk in here on a program that was floundering. They'd been in 19 of the last 22 finalist series. There was a lot of good things in place here. There wasn't a rescue operation that had to be put in place. So we had a very good handover from the previous performance department here, and still very good relationships with Mark Kilgannon and Mike Rennie were my two predecessors. They're still very involved, as a reference point. I know Rob Spurs did the same for Rob Innes. So the first thing was being respectful of what had been done already. So I came in mid-season last year, and Mark Kilgannon, who had preceded me in my role, had pretty much the next month to 6 weeks kind of planned out for me, to allow me for them to continue what they're doing, and me just to get an idea of how things were running currently. And he was also pretty honest. Like every program in Australia, the COVID situation had created some issues and potentially some detraining around some some components. So Mark felt that that he highlighted some certain areas where he thought there could be room for improvement off the back of the COVID situation. So it's a pretty seamless handover there. And yeah, it's been respectful of what's gone on before, walking in, understanding the landscape, understanding the coaches, what the coaches are looking for in the organization, and what are they looking for from the athletic performance department. I made that mistake of walking in the Rebels and trying to make a name for myself by driving up physical capacities. And as I said, there's consequences to that if you're not aware of what the organizational demands are and what the landscape is.
And from the strength and power point of view, between the different codes, is it like, from a general sense, are you changing key lifts? Are they fairly different, compared to from rugby to AFL, or are they more or less the same? You're just changing sort of your volume, your rep schemes and sets and intensities?
Again, I think this is only my interpretation of it, and if someone came in tomorrow, they might make a different decision. But and again, this ties into maybe what I'm trying to do from a study perspective. But my start process was, initially my start process was for them to keep doing what they were doing. I came in mid-season and was to really be aware of where the program was at and where we could potentially add value after that. But it starts with the football program, and you think, what are we trying to achieve? I think in not just here, but in footy generally, then contested possession and pressure are two things that contribute towards team success. So it's important that we have a strength and power program which supports those aspects. And then I guess for me, my decision-making process in regards to key lift, I don't think there's any one lift. I look at the running demands of some of our guys, and we're trying to be a high pressure team. Our training has significant running demands. So for example, something like a trap bar deadlift, I think, is an appropriate exercise for our training group and our athletes. It's an example of an exercise where you think I can increase neural outputs in regard to strength and doesn't have that same mechanical load that might cause DOMs or leg soreness, and we can get those strength adaptations without the associated hypertrophy or the associated fatigue, and allow them more time for running around that intensity outside. So I guess that's a micro example of some of the decision making in terms of it supporting the footy program. Now, someone might come in and they say, I think a front squat is a better lift, or a back squat, or a Bulgarian split squat. That's completely up to the individual, but that's just my interpretation of working from the football program back to help guide exercise selection. In terms of the differences between the sports, I was expecting a lot of differences, but I've actually been more surprised by maybe some of the commonalities. So I would say the volume of strength training is less. Guys just don't need to be maintained the same and hold on to the same body mass. We would obviously have significant portions of our training in a rugby program that were focused around maintaining hypertrophy or increasing hypertrophy and increasing lean mass. That's probably not the case with the majority of our footy athletes. There obviously is a group of players that are in that category, but not many. So the volume is probably lower. The intensities we would try and maintain lifting intensity, but some of the commonalities around still running based sports, the ability to drop body height and be strong at low positions is important around the scramble for possession contest on the floor. That's also important in a sport like rugby union, where you have to drop your body height to clear out a ruck or make a tackle. So I was expecting a lot of differences, and there are, but I've probably been surprised by maybe some of the commonalities that exist across sports as well, or across the sports.
Yeah, and for the developing SNCs listening in, that dropping that height drill, do you have technical ability? Do you help on the field with contact prep and tackle technique?
Yeah, look, I think that's the gold standard is general training, and then more specific athletic performance training, and then finally tying it into a more contextual scenario. So we might do we'll obviously do some work in our in the gym prep wise around flexibility, mobility, maybe some coordination based exercises which tax that ability to drop body height and be strong at low positions. And then we might go outside and have a drill focused around perturbations at low body heights, and then it might go straight into one of the technical coaches and do a ground ball situation. So you're trying to tie in some of those physical development aspects with the technical action. And I think that's probably the gap. I think obviously some of the Franz Bosch coordination based principles are quite polarizing, but for me I think that's where they fit. There's obviously the need to develop general physical capacities and capabilities, but sport's not about maximal force output. Team sport is about appropriate force production in short time frames across planes, and you can do that in a athletic performance sense, but then it's also important to put that into a contextual drill with the coaches as well.
Yeah, I imagine working with John Pryor, you've been exposed to the Franz Bosch systems. Like you said, it's quite polarizing, but it's very popular, and he's made a big impact on the industry. Where does running mechanics sit with your programming in the gym, or is that something you just do on the field?
No, it fits in the gym as well. I think where I've been sold on some of the coordination based principles is that I don't think it's not an and or situation. And I guess for us, we've kind of done away with maybe some of those traditional warm up, the mini band, do your crab walks, do your components, and we'll substitute that out for coordination. It's training against lower resistances, but it's still training. Like, guys don't need to be necessarily warming up like you would be to squat under a heavy under a barbell, or warm up for a heavy bench press. But I guess we've used those warm up windows, inverted commas, either on the field or session prep pre-training or the start of a gym session to integrate coordination-based principles, running mechanics, hip conditioning, trunk work, and there's the acute process of getting ready for training. I think there's a warm-up element to that, but it's also like building a wall. You just keep adding those, add a brick every day, add 3 bricks a day, and then you're accumulating those training exposures over the course of the season.
Yeah. And was that something that you brought into Sydney Swans, or were they already doing hip conditioning and that Franz Bosch sort of philosophy?
There's definitely portions of it, and I guess like I'm still learning the space too. Someone like John Pryor is excellent on the practical application of that in the team sports setting. He's a fair bit more advanced than where I am currently, but yeah, those are some principles that I probably got exposed to more with him and through Dean Benton. And I guess where those guys have challenged me is that the definition of strength and power training in the team sport environment has probably gotten broader. So when I think about when you think of strength training, you think of squatting, deadlifting, bench pressing, chinning, your traditional general exercises. But where those guys have really challenged me is that it's about the ability to get, when you're in a team sport setting in a sport like footy, it's also the ability to get in the right positions. So is your flexibility, mobility good enough to actually drop your body height and pick up a ground ball? For me, that's part of the strength and power interventions that we put in place. The coordination based principles, as I mentioned, like sport is not having 700 milliseconds to generate max force. It's, can you generate force quickly in 50, 100, 150 milliseconds, across planes? If you're asking someone to compete on the floor around a scramble, then it has to occur instantaneously. And I guess those things maybe start to bridge the gap between traditional strength and power training and football performance.
Yeah. And you mentioned the coordination aspects of it. So it's very much a skill and practicing and getting that, building that brick by brick, as you mentioned. How do you find, you talk about the importance of the tennis coach motivation, like how do you find buy-in with these drills? Is it something that is pretty easy, or is it something that you have to definitely go in and be pretty prepped to build a lot of energy around these drills to make sure they're done well?
No, I think they probably naturally lend themselves to engagement. One, we try and try and tie everything back to the football program. That there's, I said, there is no strength and power program. There's only the football program, and the aspects that we're putting in regard to our strength and power interventions or interventions on the field in warm up or acceleration or speed drills are focused on the individual being a better footy player. The other advantage I think of coordination based training is that there's by definition, there's a learning process to it. So it naturally engages the athlete. It's not a pre-planned movement like a squat or a deadlift, and you know how it's going to go. You're essentially providing a start point and an end point and asking the athlete to solve the movement problem, which I think that's engaging. If you're an athlete, you're trying to master something. And the other component to it is that Bosch talks a lot about failure being necessary for learning. So we never, if something is getting easy, then we try and challenge it through either greater variability or unstable surface or quicker transitions, and I think that stimulates the learning process.
Yeah. And then you mentioned Olympic lifting a little bit earlier. Is that something that that you do in your strength and power program?
No, it's not been a mainstay, and again, it's nothing anti-Olympic lifting. We probably, not at the Swans, but previously have done derivatives of that. It might be a jump shrug or something like that. And I guess I've probably gone to that default team sport athletic performance coach of thinking, it's not, the teaching time isn't worth the investment. But we've made a conscious effort with our first and second years, and Dan Casenza, who works with me and particularly looks after the kind of late stage academy and those first and second years. We're pretty keen on those young guys having a broader curriculum of training generally, and he's maybe convinced me that it is a more viable tool. He started those guys, those first years who came in on the draft Olympic lifting in November, and they're actually really proficient now in a relatively short period of time. So Dan's work in that space has probably challenged my conceptions there. I think it might be a useful tool. We'll at the moment we tend to maybe use things like squat jumps or loaded counter movement jumps, and try and drive some competition around that through the use of gym aware. And as you know, Jack, team sport athletes are quite competitive, so if we can put an objective number on it and put it up on a screen that updates, then they tend to get around it. And I think there's a real sweet spot there on individualization and competition in the team sport environment. If you can have, ultimately, I think that competition drives intensity, and it's intensity that drives adaptation. So there's always that sweet spot of having highly individualized programs. We have those Olympic lift variants, and the guys are really good at it. There's also value of having 40 or 50 kilos on a bar, and everyone's competing to see how quickly they can move that. But certainly Dan's work with the first years is maybe think about that. It may be a more viable tool going forward.
Yeah, if you have that with the academy all the way up, you've got time with them.
Yeah.
What about with the coaching, with the prep work, with the coordination drills? Do you and Dan break the group up in half, and so you got more eyes on them in that sense, or do you do it all at once, like you mentioned, the power of the group?
No, I guess what we try and do is, I guess, what we term coaching heavy and coach light, and we try and have either days or portions of the training which are quite coach intensive, where they're real technical components that we want them to improve on, and therefore require plenty of eyes on. Or we have components of training where we're happy to leave them go, and that might look like their upper body strength training. I don't think too many of our blokes need coaching at the minute on bench pressing and bench pulls, or not too much cueing on trap bar deadlifts, but something like our plyometric work or coordination based training, etc., I think needs to be quite heavily coached. So we try and periodize that. And I guess the way we try and solve that problem is we'll start every strength and power session with a rotation of hip conditioning, flexibility, mobility, their trunk work, and a coordination element. And they'll basically work a little circuit there to start, which is coached quite heavy. And then we'll kind of let them disperse into their stations. So we've tried to set up the environment like that. And then we've also, I guess, tried to use those daily session prep windows, or using the 5 to 10 minutes we have pre-training to, yes, warm them up, but also use those for quite direct coaching interventions. We might have a little acceleration group or the running mechanics group, and we can grab those guys. And again, it's not a significant amount of time, but it's probably microdosing those interventions over the course of a week, and then over the course of a season.
And you mentioned periodizing, like the heavy exercises, the complex movements, with the light ones. Is that something that comes into account with like a 6-day break, or if they've just come from a big meeting, you simplify and you go, okay, Dan, we're going to go lighter with them today because they've just been flogged, with the coaches for 2 hours, or is it more just an aspect of, depending on what level you're at with your program and your accumulation phase in pre-season to season?
Yeah, I guess there's probably two avenues to that. There's obviously kind of the general team dynamic, and then there's also looking at the individuals. We obviously have guys who play, don't play,
yep.
And our young guys coming through. So I guess we start with a kind of a general overview of what we think is best suited for the group holistically, or probably the guys who played AFL holistically, and then we'll work through the individuals in terms of prescription, depending on where their what their game demands have been, what the coach's requirements are of them, what we've discussed as a multidisciplinary team with the medical group, and then try and come up with appropriate interventions from that. But I think an important skill in the team sport setting is what we try and do is periodize like some of the cognitive load there. So we know when the guys come in on a Monday after a game that they're going to have a lot of information thrown at them from a technical tactical perspective. We know they're going to be sitting in long meetings and going through video clips and having one-on-ones with the coaches. So I think a day like that is better suited to something that does not have high cognitive load in something like a strength and power session. You'll probably want to come down on a day like that. That's where we tend to get our flexibility, mobility work done. We'll do 20 minutes or half an hour there, maybe a little bit of upper body, and the interaction for myself and Dan is maybe a little bit, and Rob is maybe a little bit less on those days, because we know that the cognitive load coming from the coaches is going to be pretty significant. and then it might be vice versa the next day. We're obviously playing a lot of footy the next day, but the volume of meetings maybe isn't the same. The review process isn't the same. So it gives us an opportunity to maybe put in some of that coordination based work or coach them through the plyometric work. And it's obviously never there's never an exact science there. It's interpreting and managing the different variables that go into managing a professional athlete. But that's the kind of general theme that we kind of try to take.
Yeah, no, thanks for sharing. And for the athletes listening in, when you're working with an athlete for the first time, what do you get excited about when you see from an athletic point of view where this guy's got a lot of, or girl's got a lot of potential in their growth as an athlete?
What I'd say to any young athlete who's starting out, I think you often hear stories of athletes later on in their career and they don't train that much, they just play. The majority of guys who reach the top of their profession are consistent in their professional habits and accumulate a lot of time training. That's how you get good in the first place. So you get guys, and I think it's quite easy in the middle part of your career to get a bit more comfortable and to drift a little bit. But I find the best guys are the people who have, if you're Richie McCaw's pretty famous story in rugby union, the tail end of his career, only training once and playing a game, but that's because you've accumulated 15 or 20 years of consistent training at the top level. That's how you become an elite athlete, is by being consistent and experiencing a lot of I read a decent Tom Brady quote recently or a while ago. He's talking about retiring. He's like, why would I retire now? I've never had more answers to the problems that I see in a football game. That's how you get good. You accumulate a lot of experience. So I think it's always exciting when you get a young athlete first time in, because the environment is so new. The support services around them, they're getting meals delivered. They can have a massage after training. There's someone working with them individually to improve. And the reality is, if you've reached it to an AFL list, then you're on that top 1%. You're in that 1% or 2% athletically anyway. That's the reason why you're there in the first place. So it's exciting when you see their how enthusiastic they are. I think the message I would have is that it's important to maintain that as you get, and that's true, I think, as if you're playing VFL football or if you're playing local park footy, you get good by accumulating consistency and accumulating training time.
Yeah, I love that. Consistent habits, like you talked about earlier with the head coach at Leicester Tigers, how important it was with behaviours. So, you mentioned a few highlights so far, but is there one that really stands out in the highlight of your career? Something that you're really proud of throughout your professional career to date?
I'm very lucky that I do something. I probably count it more as a vocation than a job. I'm lucky that this is my hobby as much as something that pays the bills, and I'm very lucky in that sense. And there's been some highlights there. I guess being involved in premiership wins in the UK was. I probably appreciate it more now as I go further away from it. So that's what I thought professional sport was, going to grand finals, and I haven't been back to one in a decade. You realize how special those days are to actually win the big prize. The Melbourne Rebels experience, while there were some tough years there, that's had a profound effect on me as a practitioner. I'm definitely a lot better from being there, surrounded by good practitioners and good people who are trying their hardest to get to that level. And then working international sport, I just did a season with the Wallabies, but being involved in a Bledsoe Cup win, or a Bledsoe Cup game win, I should say, not winning the competition or winning the cup, but being the All Blacks in Suncorp was pretty special. And then I probably didn't appreciate how big it would be, but being on the sideline and involved in game day, watching Lance kick his 1,000 goal was that's probably one of the most insane things I've been in. It probably maybe is the most insane thing I've been involved in professional sport. I actually didn't really comprehend. Yeah, I didn't actually really comprehend, because obviously I haven't grown up here and I've never seen a pitch invasion. But there was obviously 7 minutes left, and the kit man came to me and he's like, "Oh, we need to get everything off the sideline." And I was like, "Why?" It's 7 minutes left in the game. And he's like, "Mate, they're going to go nuts if he kicks it." I was like, "Well, surely at the end of the game." He was like, "No, mate, they'll go straight away." I was like, "You can't get anywhere near the pitch in most professional sports."
Yeah.
And So I was of the very wrong assumption that if something was going to happen, it was going to happen when the final whistle went. But yeah, that was a pretty special event to be involved in.
Oh, it was crazy. I was watching that on the TV, and yeah, it would be once in a lifetime, if not more, experience to even just see it, let alone be there. Where were you at the time? Were all staff tucked away inside somewhere, or were you on the ground?
Yeah, I was on the sideline. I was just by the race. I said the aunt, who's our logistics manager, was like, we just have to get everything off, like all the spare. Because obviously there's jerseys and spare boots and all sorts of stuff on the sideline. He was like, we got to get it out. And yeah, there's some pretty hectic stories from that night of people coming over the dugout and crashing through physio tables and kids tripping up and their parents running away and trying to get in close to the action. But yeah, it was exciting night to be a part of.
100%. And then on the flip side, what about a major challenge that you've overcome in your career, and what have you learned from it, or how did you grow from it, I guess?
Well, again, I as I probably highlighted, that transition from Leicester to Melbourne, I've learned so much from that experience. I think, if I'm honest, when I reflect back, I was maybe quite lucky to survive that first kind of 12 months really after that transition to Melbourne, with all with good intentions, but I think it probably created more problems than what I solved in the short term. So that
was
got
that
me,
with like injuries, or what were some of the things? Yeah,
there was some of that. I think look, there was no significant injuries there, but I think what we had, maybe in my first season there, I think we had 3 guys pull up with facet joints, on a Thursday. I always think stuff happens. I'm pretty comfortable with the fact that if you train 45 blokes for 4 hours a week for 40 weeks of the year, then the chances of something to someone at some point is, you've got to be okay. You try and mitigate risk, but something might occur to someone at some point. Yeah. But I think we had 3 short-term injuries in my first season there at Melbourne, but 3 that cost blokes games at the weekend. Something would happen on a Thursday and they wouldn't get up for the Saturday. And as I said, that has a significant impact on team performance at the weekend. And so like that was a pretty significant challenge. As I said, I probably had a bit of that. I was going through that kind of Dunning-Kruger cycle at the time, where I thought I had all the answers because I come from a really successful program, was used to being aggressive with prescriptions, and going in and have to tell a coach that so-and-so has had a aggravated his facet joint doing X and Y Z on a Thursday isn't an easy conversation, and then having to do it a couple of weeks later is an even harder conversation. But I learned a lot from that experience. One, being more considerate and understanding what are some of the other pressure points for some of the other stakeholders that are involved in the organization, and then just being more resilient with that stuff as well. If you're training athletes regularly, or if you're an athlete training regularly yourself, then occasionally things will go wrong, and you have to be resilient enough to kind of cop that, review it, try and learn from it, and then go on.
Yeah, well said, mate. And for S&Cs listening in that are managing a program and maybe going through that current experience right now, what would be your review process, and then how would you, with more experience now, how do you manage it? I guess better than at the beginning, where you're dealing with these hard decisions, and then also being able to communicate with the coach.
Yeah, well, I think the important thing is that ideally you want to be making as many of those mistakes as you can if you're a young practitioner in the amateur environment, where it's not a positive experience anywhere, but when the consequences are a little bit less, that's where you want to be learning, maybe trialing things, making mistakes, and learning from them. I think if you're in the pro environment, and what I learned from that is to be, I think the skill set is being considerate of how you impact the holistic program, and that's and having an understanding of that. And I hope this doesn't sound like it's a case of being conservative with prescriptions. That's not the case, because it's just understanding when's the time to push, when's the time to maybe consolidate, who are the individuals that we need to maybe look after this week, or who are the individuals that we need to push to make them a greater chance of being selected in the team in 4, 5, 6 weeks time. I think it's been quite honest with yourself, like, and going through a pretty thorough review process, speaking to other practitioners in the field, speaking with most of us are working as part of multidisciplinary teams, even if you're part of a local footy club, there's probably a physio there or a head coach there that, really honestly reviewing those situations and reviewing your practice, and then also understanding that stuff will happen. The game of AFL or the game of professional rugby union is a tough game, and if you're constantly protecting yourself, then you're not going to be prepared, and the injury's not going to manifest itself maybe on a in a gym session or a field session, but it will manifest itself when you're trying to perform at the weekend at some point.
Yeah. Which is probably worse for the coach when you're a player down. Yeah.
And the worst thing you can do as a practitioner is to be afraid there and being conservative, and you think, okay, nothing's happened under my watch. But if you're picking up, we're all responsible. Everyone in the team is responsible for team performance at the weekend. So it's not to look after your own self-interest. It's in the betterment of the organization and the team going well.
Awesome. Well said, mate. That we'll move into the get to know you side of the podcast. So they're a bit lighter, these ones, but if you're a quote man or just a general life motto, but have you got a favorite inspirational quote or a life motto that you sort of live by?
There's a couple I write in my top of my journal every day when I'm planning my day, and one's strong opinions weakly held. So I think where I am in my career is that I believe in certain things because they're evidence-based and I have experience to suggest that they work. But there's nothing that I believe in so firmly that if I'm presented with information to the contrary, then I'm not willing to change my mind. And that's happened numerous times over my career. And it's probably a little bit of a red flag for me these days when I speak to someone and they seem really sure. I think if you talk to most people that are, if I look at the people who are much more experienced than I am, then they obviously have a lot of experience and they are working from an evidence-based practice, but they're still trying to figure out how to solve problems in the environment. They're not entirely sure what the best solution is in the applied environment. And then the second one is probably on the same theme, like that one of as the island of our knowledge grows, so too do the shores of our ignorance. That's a Johnny Wheeler quote, I think, which the more you learn about human performance and team performance, the more you realize you don't know. And it's you're dealing with a complex organism in a human being operating in a complex environment like a game of footy or a team sport environment. So there's a lot of variables there which you're just never going to have a full grasp of all the variables that impact an individual and impact team performance. And I think that's quite when you realize that, it's a humbling experience and probably makes you more comfortable not knowing all the answers, and more highlights the fact you just need to continue on that educational process.
Yeah, embrace the chaos, huh?
Embrace the chaos.
What about in your work life? What are your pet peeves? What makes you angry?
I guess that consistency piece comes back to me. I think, and I get it. I get it because professional athletes are blokes in their 20s, and I think my own personal journey, I probably didn't start to figure out who I was personally until I was maybe closer to 30 than I was at 22 or 23. But the obviously the perception is that what you're doing is going to keep going forever, and that eventually the flag will come and the premiership will come, and the reality is that it has a short lifespan even if you have a long career. So I think inconsistencies in behavior and getting bored with doing some of the things that we know are important for not just athletic performance but human performance, nutritional habits, good sleep quality, being engaged in aspects outside of footy. When I see people getting inconsistent with some of those behaviors, that tends to irritate me. But then that might be it's obviously important to realize too that not everyone is as straight-laced and boring and disciplined as I am now, and I probably wasn't like that either when I was 23 or 24.
And what about when you have a day off? What's your favorite way to spend your day off when you get one?
Oh well, I'm very lucky to have a supportive wife who has really allowed me to pursue my career ambitions. So it's always good when we get a bit of a day off just to have some family time, to be honest, and spend time with. She's a very successful career in her own right, but probably with the nature of professional sport is that it's quite demanding, and as a result, she puts in a hell of a shift at home. So it's always nice to spend time with my family, with Sarah, my wife. My daughter's 4 and bundle of energy, and then we've got another one on the way in August. So probably spending time with family, drinking some coffee, hanging out at the beach, sneaking in a gym session. Probably it's pretty basic, but it's what makes me happy.
The good life.
The good life.
Recharge and connect with home. That's awesome, mate. Well, yeah, thanks so much for jumping on. We'll wrap it up now. What are you excited about for 2022? You got plenty going on with Sydney Swans, family, new bub on the way, and obviously your PhD that you embarked on as well. So what's front of mind at the moment that you're excited about?
I guess professionally, I really think we're on the verge of potentially doing something with the Swans. I said, it feels. I'm still learning the game of footy, but the environment and the vibe feels like it did at those Leicester days for me. And it's, I think we could really do something. We've got a really good mix of experience in guys like Joey Kennedy and obviously Lance Franklin, Sam Reid, and then some really quality young blokes coming up through Chad Warner, Errol Gould. And so it just feels like professionally we could really do something in the next couple of years, which I'm excited about. We're in the process of constructing this new training facility down the road, which is really exciting professionally. And I guess with the PhD and speaking with you and work and ACA, I just feel like what's essentially a personal interest around that, I've experiential personal interest around that decision making is also starting to filter into some of my academic and educational and professional interests, which I'm quite excited about. And then family, man, it's going to be hectic in 6 or 7 weeks from now, but I'm excited about meeting our little daughter and our family being complete. So that's an exciting time there as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, yeah, you're living a full life, mate. So congratulations and thanks for sharing with us your journey so far. Clearly there's more years to come, but thanks for sharing with us and being so open and honest as well with what's worked and some learnings and lessons along the way as well. So really appreciate it. No doubt I've got a lot from it, but also the audience of athletes and strength and conditioning coaches and practitioners working elite sport. On behalf of all of them, thank you for jumping on and sharing with us.
Awesome. Thanks for having me on. I appreciate the time and having the conversation.
For those that want to get in contact and asking questions, where's the best place to get in contact with yourself?
Yeah, sure. I'm not the best on social media, but probably you can find me at LinkedIn. I'll be sitting there with I really need to spend more time on photograph day at the it's the team photograph day because I always look a bit scruffy, but you'll find me there on LinkedIn somewhere in my Swans polo, Shane Lehane, and anyone who wants to connect and reach out, I'm happy to chat.
We'll add the link in the show notes, guys. And thank you for everyone that's tuned in live. If you joined in halfway through or at the end, make sure to tune into the very start. This episode will live on our YouTube channels. Once we end live, you can watch it from the very start, and then the podcast recording will be live next Tuesday. Our next live chat will be with Valery Stomanov, who is also a strength and conditioning coach. He's currently the coordinator of Bendigo Southeast College. That will be at 8:30 p.m. Friday the 15th of July. So I'll see you guys then.